We are back with another episode of App Stories. I'm John Voorhees, and with me, of course, is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well today. You know what? We've got 4 sponsors today: SourceGraph, RevenueCat, Pillow, and Instabug. And you'll hear a little bit more about them throughout the show. But today, you know what we're going to do? We are going to talk about the updates to the OSs. We're going to talk about 15.4 for both iOS and iPadOS, and 12.3, which is macOS. And we should kick it off, I think, where there's the overlap. We should talk first and foremost about universal control, because it's really one of the marquee features on both platforms, on the iPad and the Mac at least, obviously not the iPhone.
Right. Universal control was originally announced at WWDC last year. And
feels like a lifetime ago at this point.
It does feel like a lifetime ago. And for those who may not be aware of this feature at this moment, I think it's very unlikely for the kind of person who listens to App Stories and reads Mac Stories. But universal control is fundamentally different from Sidecar, which is a feature that came out with macOS Catalina.
Yeah, that's right. It was Catalina and iOS 13, so it was right there at the beginning of iPadOS.
Sidecar lets you turn an iPad into an external display for your Mac. So the iPad becomes a quote-unquote dumb display for macOS. With universal control, it's sort of like the other way around. You can use it, you have to have a Mac in the mix, right?
Right.
You cannot use universal control from iPad to iPad. There needs to be a Mac in the mix of devices. You can do from iPad to Mac or from Mac to iPad. It doesn't matter, but at least one macOS machine needs to be included.
And you can have up to 3 devices, is my understanding of the limits, although I haven't tried 4, so.
And what you can do is you can use one keyboard and one trackpad to move over the cursor to another nearby computer and use it, controlling it in its own operating system from the trackpad and keyboard on another device. In practice, what this means is if you're using a MacBook, you can use the MacBook's trackpad and keyboard to move the cursor over to the iPad next to it. The cursor becomes the iPadOS pointer, and you can use the iPadOS pointer from the MacBook's trackpad, and you can interact with the keyboard from the MacBook's keyboard. And then you move it back to the Mac, and you're interacting with your MacBook again.
Right. In practice, when you're doing this, it's just like when you move that cursor over from the Mac to the iPad. It's just like you were using an iPad with an external keyboard and trackpad. Yep. It's just the exact same thing. And it works with mice, too. There are some issues with some third-party mice, which I guess we can talk about, but it's any pointing device and keyboard will work with this, which is really nice.
Yeah, you had some problems with your Logitech.
I did, the MX Master 3 mouse. And Logitech, they have their own software, which is not very good. It's one of those cross-platform type apps that's used to set up the mouse. But the nice thing about it is usually you don't have to go into that app very often, because once you've got your mouse set up the way you want it, you don't have to open the app again. But it does run a little software in the background that you had clued me into, that was discussed on Reddit, I believe, where the problem I was having was when I would move the mouse from the Mac to the iPad, the scroll wheel would stop working. And by going into the privacy settings, I could disable the Logi options daemon, which is this background process that runs to control the mouse. Now, as I understand it, that little bit of software is really what's controlling customization of your mouse. So if you're not using your mouse in a custom way, like having the buttons do certain special things and whatnot, you can turn that off, disable it, and then the scroll wheel works perfectly fine. This is a Logitech issue from what I can tell. And I hope that they'll update their software soon so that you can use that bit of software and have it enabled, because it does, if you disable it, you're going to lose some of the functionality of your mouse. I don't personally do a lot of heavy customization on my mouse. I'm more of a trackpad person anyway, but I have the mouse mostly so that I can kind of even out the wear and tear on my two hands as I'm manipulating the cursor, because sometimes doing a lot of scrolling, for instance, with a trackpad, I start getting a little bit of wrist pain. And so that's why I like to have the mouse there so that I can use that wheel more than anything else to scroll long documents.
Right. We should mention, I think, some of the other requirements that are, for universal control to work on your devices. There's a few things you got to keep in mind. You need to be signed into the same iCloud account with all the devices you want to, have participate in universal control.
Yes,
this means
with two-factor authentication.
And you need to have two-factor authentication enabled. In practice, this means like I wanted to test Sylvia's iPad with universal control the other day, but I couldn't because it's signed into Sylvia's iCloud account. So you cannot do that sort of thing. If you want to use it wirelessly, you have to be about 10 meters or like 30 feet. Those devices need to be within 30 feet of each other. So you can use it, with the iPad in a room and the Mac in a room next to it. But it's not like you will be able to do this like on one floor of the house, you're going to have a Mac and on the other, you're going to have an iPad. They need to be relatively close to each other.
The other day I picked up my MacBook Air, took it in the other room. The iPad was still sitting in a stand on my desk, and my cursor disappeared when I started using my MacBook Air, and I realized that I had swiped the cursor over onto the iPad, which was in the other room, and I didn't realize it because the display hadn't turned off yet. So, it is possible. And I'm on the first floor of my house. It's like, it is probably within 30 feet, but it was a bit of a stretch, but it still worked that one time, which I thought was kind of funny. It's easy enough not to figure out what's going on though.
Mm-hmm. For wireless use, you gotta have Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and handoff enabled. I guess it's using the continuity features that already exist on macOS and iPadOS. And if you want to use it via USB, which I haven't tried, but you can plug in a cable in your iPad and you got to trust your computer on iPadOS. You're going to get a dialog asking to trust the computer and you will be able to use it over USB. I assume that over USB, the performance is going to be better.
I would think, although it's awfully good wirelessly. I haven't, which is why I haven't really felt the need to try that. It'll be interesting to see with the Studio display. That has the Thunderbolt 3 ports in the back. Could have a pretty easy and nice setup with that, with a relatively short USB-C cable running between the two as an option for connecting and using universal control. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by SourceGraph. These days, every company needs to be a tech company because there's so much code to deal with. It's hard to have any kind of online presence or digital service without copious amounts of code, and code affects everyone. It's the foundation of the technology that we use every single day. But handling big databases can be tricky, especially when you think about the volume and variety of code. So thankfully, SourceGraph is here to solve all of your company's code-related headaches. They are tackling big code. More than ever, companies need resources to increase developer velocity, to give people what they need to be agile, innovative, and productive. With SourceGraph, developers can figure out how to use a particular function, find and solve problems more quickly, identify what impact a code change will have on its dependencies, and a whole lot more. SourceGraph is the future of how companies are built, and it's powering the infrastructure of today's most successful, high-growth businesses, including 3 out of 5 of the biggest tech companies. SourceGraph's current customers include PayPal, Uber, Plaid, Reddit, Atlassian, and many, many more. If your company uses code, you need SourceGraph. Go now to about.sourcegraph.com. Again, that's about.sourcegraph.com to find out why some of the biggest tech companies in the world use SourceGraph and to see what it can do for yours. Our thanks to SourceGraph for their support of App Stories.
So, tell me how so I've wrote about my use of universal control in the 15.4 overview and in my iPad Air review last week. But you had this article on Mac Stories about your usage of universal control with this iPad stand next to your Mac. Can you go into a little more detail about that and what you've been doing and how?
Yeah. So what I decided was I was going to create a setup that fixes the fact that widgets on the Mac are stuck in the notification center.
Oh, okay. Okay.
All right. Did you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
All right. So what I've done is my iPad Pro display is limited to a single home screen with 4 large widgets and an extra large widget. And I, unlike you, I'm okay with stacks. I have stacks set up, but I have them so that they're not trying to smart rotate on me because it doesn't work that well. And so what I've got as kind of my default is I have a large widget in the upper left-hand corner that is the weather. It's a Carrot weather widget. Underneath that is another large widget, which is home widget. And that one I really like because when I'm done at the end of the day, I can swipe over there, turn off the lights in my studio, and be done for the day. And then beneath that is parcel because on any given week, I typically have a package or two coming from UPS or FedEx or wherever. And so it's a quick way to check my packages. The extra large widget has a timery widget, which is showing me saved timers, current timer, and kind of the cumulative time for the week. A calendar widget, the Apple Calendar widget, so I can see my schedule at a glance. And good tasks in the week view. So I see 3 columns. I see today, tomorrow, and later, which show me what's coming up in my schedule in terms of tasks. The bottom left large widget is kind of the fun widget. I've got Marvis, so I can get the music started quickly through that. Beneath that, I've got Game Center. And then I've got both Music Harbor and Play by Marcos Tanaka. So I can, if I want to take a break and watch a YouTube video, they're all right there. Or pick out a new release and listen to music from there. The middle one in this bottom row of large widgets right now has a tweetbot. The one that's usually shown is shortcuts. And I have ones here to do things like quickly, the shortcuts are things like switching between light mode and dark mode. And then the second widget is I'm experimenting with having a tweetbot one here, but I haven't found a lot of use for that. In a way, I mean, to me, widgets serve 2 purposes. One is glanceable information, but the other is quick access into the app. So I'm using that tweetbot one is kind of, oh, here's some interesting glanceable information, but also as a way to just get into the app quickly. And then the final widget is not a stack. It's just Reader. And it has a particular folder in Reader showing headlines from my Apple folder, which has Apple News. Now, this one, I'm not sure whether I'm going to keep it either because it doesn't update that frequently. And I go in and check the news more frequently than it updates. And so I haven't found as much use for that. But, this is a work in process still, but I really like having these widgets here because they're just sitting there and I can go over, look and access these apps really quickly, get some of this glanceable information very quickly and use it that way without having to change my setup on my Mac. I guess the other thing I would say I've done over here is that, for instance, when we did the Apple event the other day, I used this to keep a split view of messages in Discord to see what was going on, right? To keep track of that stuff, which is really nice. And I've actually started using HomeCam with this once in a while too. So if I'm sitting here and you and I are talking, recording, and I see trucks going by outside with the UPS trucks and so forth, I can quickly glance over at the camera on our front door and see if someone's bringing a package and is about to ring the doorbell while we're recording. So, yeah, that's kind of how I'm using it right now.
I think it's really smart to think of, this kind of use of universal control to do something that iPadOS can do that macOS cannot do.
Right.
And now that you can combine the two of them and make it super easy to jump between the 2 platforms, that's exactly what universal control was made for. Like, you can keep using macOS and you can keep using iPadOS, but it's easier than ever to move between the 2 of them. That widget idea, it's something that I kind of want to steal. It makes me sad because when you mentioned what you were doing, something that I immediately thought of was, well, imagine if you could have an automation trigger in shortcuts that detected when you're using universal control. And imagine if you could do things like, when my iPad connects via universal control, change my home screen or something.
That would be really nice.
But that's not possible.
No, that's not. That's,
no, there's no.
I don't think you can do that. No, but that's a great idea. I'd love to see it expanded to do that. And you know what? This is the thing, and I know you've talked about this a little bit because you're using the Mac more these days. My computing world has always been this hybrid approach. And part of that is because so much of what you and I do is based on things like shortcuts that you developed, years ago at this point, some of them for things like the club. And so I always found myself, whether it's the shortcuts that you created or an app that I just prefer to use over something on my Mac, moving back and forth between the Mac and the iPad and sometimes the iPhone. And this, for me, is the perfect setup because I was already doing this. It's just way more convenient now because I can have these two displays sitting right next to each other. And by the way, I'm using the 12 South Hoverbar Duo stand, which I really like because it really elevates the iPad quite a bit. So I can have the top edge of the iPad even with the top edge of my 27-inch display. And I've been loving it. I've seen people on Twitter say, "Oh, this is a really neat demo, but it's not really useful." It totally is useful. It's not going to be for everybody. Nothing really ever is. No feature really is. But if you're already using both these platforms and using them, moving back and forth between them, it's perfect for that. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by RevenueCat. If you're a developer, your time should be spent focused on what makes your app special, not hassling with StoreKit. In-app subscriptions are critical to a lot of app success, but getting the infrastructure right is tough. That is, unless you're using RevenueCat. RevenueCat is payments infrastructure simplified. You don't have to worry about managing servers or writing complex back-end code. They take care of all of that for you. What's more, RevenueCat is cross-platform. So when you decide to expand beyond iOS to Android or the web, you can still use RevenueCat. RevenueCat lets you sync status across all of your customers' devices, and it has terrific out-of-the-box analytics to track your revenue, customer retention, and churn, so you're always on top of your business and how it's performing. RevenueCat integrates in-app purchase data with best-in-class tools, too, and it's trusted by over 9,000 apps, including ones like Notion, StockTwits, and the photography app VSCO. Set up RevenueCat today. Integrating with your app will take just hours, not days. So what are you waiting for? Visit RevenueCat.com to learn more today. There's a link in the show notes, too, which will let them know you came from App Stories. Again, that URL is RevenueCat.com. RevenueCat, subscription management built for mobile apps. Our thanks to RevenueCat for their support of the show.
All right, let's move on to Face ID with a mask, which is another big new feature of iOS 15.4, not available for iPadOS, not available for iPads with a true depth camera that otherwise can use Face ID. This is iPhone only, and more specifically, it's iPhone 12 and later only. So the iPhone 10 and the iPhone 11 cannot use Face ID with a mask. By the way, sort of unrelated question. And you got to be honest with me.
Mm-hmm.
Over the years, have you normalized calling the iPhone 10 iPhone X? Because I have.
No.
Really?
No, I've always just called it the iPhone 10.
I think my friends in real life, they have pushed me over the edge here.
Yeah, maybe they have. I mean, I don't know. I haven't. I don't think I had. I haven't had nearly as many people call it that.
Really, and especially the 10s, I always call the XS.
The XS.
Well, in Italian, it makes more sense. It's XS.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
It's nicer than XS because it sounds like excess.
Yes, it does. It does.
But yeah. Anyway, the X. Damn it. The 10, 10s, and 11 cannot use Face ID with a mask. Just the 12 and later. So Face ID with a mask. I think the best way to think about it is the following. Obviously, the Face ID sensor cannot see through a mask.
Right.
What it's doing instead is only taking into consideration according to Apple, unique features around the eye area of your face. So you are making a conscious security trade-off when you enable Face ID with a mask, which is disabled by default, but now Apple gives you the option to use it. The compromise, the trade-off is you're giving up some security because Face ID is no longer scanning for the whole face. It's just looking for the unique features around the eye area, which also means a few additional things. You cannot use Face ID with a mask with sunglasses on. And you cannot cover the eye area with like hats or, visors. Obviously, headsets are not supported. Joanna Stern had a great video on the Wall Street Journal showing all the different combinations that are allowed by regular Face ID as opposed to Face ID with a mask. But you can add pairs of eyeglasses, regular glasses that you use. You can add them separately to Face ID's settings in 15.4, and I did. And obviously, I have decided to use Face ID with a mask because the security trade-off for me is worth it. Giving up some security in exchange for the convenience of no longer having to type in a passcode, that made it worth it for me. Additionally, one last thing I forgot to mention. Once you enable Face ID with a mask, when you're wearing a mask, you will always have to look down with your eyes into the true depth sensor. It's basically like, even if you have attention awareness disabled for Face ID in settings, when you're wearing a mask, it will always be enforced. It will always be enabled. And your iPhone will tell you, look down to unlock. So there's a few differences between regular Face ID and Face ID with a mask. But for me personally, like I just read as of a few minutes ago, in Italy, we are dropping masks indoors starting May 1st. I am personally not going to do that for a while because I still don't think this is over and I still don't want to catch COVID. So I am when I'm going to the mall, when I'll be going to the supermarket, I am still going to mask up myself, but that's my decision. And because of that, Face ID with a mask comes in handy. Sure, this would have been lovely to have 2 years ago. I would love to get the details eventually as to why the iPhone 11 cannot support Face ID with a mask. Like, what's different in the true depth sensor that makes this iPhone 12 and later exclusive? But I'm still glad that they rolled this out in 2022, 2 years into the pandemic.
Yeah, I wonder if it could be the compute power of that phone, just because maybe there's too much of it. Maybe they decided there was too much of a delay. There was maybe a lag or something when you did it that way. I don't know. I mean, it would be interesting to find out. Yeah, I've got this enabled too. I think it's a great feature. I really appreciate that it exists. Like you, I mean, as I've talked about before, I messed up my knee recently, so I've been going to see doctors, and hospitals and things are very much still requiring masks indoors. And I too have been wearing masks indoors for other places I go. So I like having this for that very reason. I did have a little trouble setting it up the first time. I think I rushed it and didn't really pay much attention, and it was failing for me. So I redid it, and ever since I redid it, it's been absolutely perfect. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Pillow. More and more studies show that getting a good night's sleep can improve your health and well-being in more ways than one. Pillow is a simple app that can help you be more aware of your sleep patterns and make informed decisions on how to improve your sleep quality. All you have to do is wear your Apple Watch while you sleep. Pillow will track and analyze your sleep automatically and give you a full report in the morning. If you want to use Pillow with just an iPhone or iPad, you can do that too with the press of a button before you go to bed. If you have an Apple Watch, you can also get important information about your heart rate trend, variability, heart rate dip, and blood oxygen levels for each sleep session. You can even record sounds that occur during the night, like sleep talking, sleep apnea, snoring, and other noises that might be affecting your sleep. If your Apple Watch is a Series 6 or newer, Pillow will also display information about the intensity of those sounds during each sleep session and give you a report in the morning. Another valuable aspect of Pillow is helping you stay informed about how you can improve your Another valuable aspect of Pillow is helping you make informed decisions to improve your sleep. Pillow comes with a dedicated section where you can discover trends, get personalized insights, sleep tips, and easily compare your sleep metrics to things like your weight, steps, caffeine consumption, and more. If you want to wind down and relax before sleep or listen to something throughout the night, Pillow comes with an expanding collection of sleep aid sounds, guided meditations, bedtime stories, and music produced specifically for sleep. Naps are a way to boost focus, creativity, and overall well-being. If you're working from home and can take a nap, use Pillow's Power Nap feature. Pillow can also wake you with your iPhone, Apple Watch, or iPad at the latest possible stage of your sleep using its smart alarm feature. Starting with watchOS 6, Pillow's battery consumption is minimal too. Last but not least, Pillow is very privacy-minded. All of your sleep and audio data are encrypted and stored on your device and in your iCloud storage account using end-to-end encryption. You don't need to register or create an account to use Pillow. You can use it anonymously, and it doesn't collect or send your personal data anywhere else. Pillow is free to download on the App Store and comes with a set of great features that you can use every day for free. If you want to try Pillow's premium features, there's also an option to start a 7-day free trial. Just visit pillow.app to get started and learn more. Again, that URL is pillow.app. Our thanks to Pillow for their support of App Stories.
All right, I want to talk about shortcuts changes next because there's a few things that that we mentioned before on Mac Stories and App Stories that Apple has changed. So a few months ago, you may remember, I published on the club and later on the site a story called, I believe, The Curious Case of Apple's missing shortcuts actions. Basically, I was making the argument for, in addition to having new actions in shortcuts, that I would have liked to see Apple spend some time updating some of their existing actions, because I don't want shortcuts actions for Apple stuff to end up like watch faces on the Apple Watch, where new watch faces are always introduced, but nobody cares about the old ones. And the old ones are never updated with new designs or tweaks or support for the new displays or, more complications. I would like to see some quality of life improvements for old existing actions in shortcuts. And in 15.4, there's potentially a first sign of this, where the reminders actions that have been around for ages now, that allow you to filter reminders, create reminders, they have been updated with support for tagging, which is a new feature in iOS and iPadOS 15. You can now tag your reminders, and these old actions that have been around since the workflow days, I believe these actions were probably in the first version of workflow even. These actions, they now support creating a reminder with a tag or filtering by tag. Now, there's still no action to list all of your existing tags, but it's a start, right?
It is. It's definitely a start. I think a list feature would be awfully good. I know, for instance, like GoodLinks does that, and it's very powerful when combined with the other actions that exist. But it is nice to see this, especially happening mid-cycle, because it shows that there's progress being made on things other than the bugs that have been fixed since the release of the OS. So I'm glad to have it. I hope that they continue to push forward with it, and that we'll see even more from reminders, but also all of the other Apple apps.
Yeah, there's a long list of old actions that need updating. Like, for example,
Notes has a lot of really old
Notes
ones.
is still limited to plain text. You cannot pass formatted text to Notes or file
or
attachments
images, right?
Or images.
Right.
Yeah, or one that I really find fascinating: the action to find photos.
Oh yeah,
it doesn't support literally any of the intelligent search features that Apple added to photos for the past 3 years. like searching for objects, people, places, animals,
Right.
landmarks, events. None of those are supported in the Find Photos action. So hopefully at WWDC, well, hopefully this year we will not get another shortcuts redesign. So hopefully we'll just get a lot of bug fixes, some new features, because new features are always needed in shortcuts, but also like what I would I don't like to use the expression like a snow leopard release, but like a general cleanup of the whole thing, and like a big maintenance update with like UI polish, performance, stability, and taking all of the existing actions and updating them for 2022. That would also be excellent.
Yeah, I'd also like to see any new apps that come into the OS support shortcuts right out of the box, so that we get kind of an indication that shortcuts actions have become one of those features that have to be pulled forward whenever there's an update to the OS across the board, which has not been the case historically. We should mention too, Federico, that these reminders actions are also on the Mac. We don't have to cover those separately when we talk about macOS. The tagging is there as well.
Yeah. Also in shortcuts, the new notify when run toggle. So this needs some context. Personal automations in shortcuts, right? If you have a personal automation, you know that most automations used to support a setting, a toggle called what was called confirm when running.
Mm-hmm.
That toggle that you could disable before allowed you to let an automation run without your manual confirmation, without having to say, yes, run this automation. However, pre-iOS 15.4, you will still be notified every time when that automation was running. If you're the kind of person with 20, 30, 50 automations running in the background every day, all day,
it's a lot.
It's a lot of notifications, right? They add up over time and they're a constant nuisance, these alerts. Now in 15.4, if you disable ask when running, you can also, like a second toggle appears, and you can disable notify when running. And this one, it lets you skip that notification. Like it doesn't display that notification. So the automation runs in the background without confirmation and without telling you that it's running. However, Apple being Apple, they couldn't fully commit to letting automations run in the background without no messaging whatsoever. Right. So you will still get at some point a notification with a summary that says 20 automations recently ran in the background. So I get it. They want to be extra careful. So they found this compromise. They now let you disable the alert, but they still tell you, like they still collect everything together, and they tell you, hey, look, these 20 automations recently ran in the background. We just want to make sure you're okay with this. Unfortunately, this notify when run toggle does not exist for shortcuts that you add to the home screen as icons. So I have 3 shortcuts on my iPhone home screen that are custom icons, right? When I tap those icons and the shortcut runs, I still get that notification banner every single time that confirms that the icon I just manually tapped did in fact run a shortcut that I manually added to the home screen. So thank you for telling me. I would love to have this toggle for those shortcuts added to the home screen as well.
It's funny because it seems like that's the place there where they should have started and gotten rid of the banner first, because they're not running by themselves on a schedule in the background. You're actually manually poking at them.
Yeah. So, and of course, unfortunately, this release didn't bring personal automations to macOS. John, do you have a recommended go-to solution for people who want to run shortcuts on a schedule on macOS? Any favorites?
Yeah, I do. I wrote about this a while back for Club Mac Stories members, which is you can save your shortcuts as applets. You just go to you can go up to the file menu and choose save to dock. I think that's what it is. You can do save to dock, and then you don't have to keep it in your dock, but that creates a little applet. And then that's a file that you'll find on your system. You can associate that with an event in Calendar. So what I've done is I've created a separate calendar called Shortcuts. And when I want to run something on a schedule, I create an event, and then I associate, instead of, you can associate, you can go down to, I have to do it while I'm talking about it to make sure I don't misspeak about how this works. But what you do is you create an event, and then you edit that event. And when you go to the alerts section, usually people use that to create some sort of buzzer or notification or whatever it happens to be that reminds you of the event. But if you click on the drop down for alerts, there is an option at the bottom called Custom. And Custom lets you pick a file to open. So normally what you'll see as the default is message with sound. That's what you're probably most used to. But if you click on that drop down, there you can either fire off an email or open a file. And opening a file is what you pick. You go through, you find your shortcut on the system, you associate it here, and then you can, at the appointed hour, you can have that shortcut automatically run in the background, which is really great. It's probably the simplest way to do that. Then what I've done is I've just disabled that calendar from showing in my list of calendars, so that when I'm checking my schedule for the day, I'm not seeing all these entries for shortcuts. Instead, I only have that enabled when I have to actually edit one of these things. So pretty simple way to do it. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Instabug. Building mobile apps presents some challenges. Bugs, crashes, and performance issues can be a nightmare for developers. But what if you could not only detect all of these issues, but also get a holistic understanding of the quality of your app from your user's point of view? Instabug's lightweight SDK grabs all of the insights you need to build top-quality apps through comprehensive bug and crash reports, performance monitoring, and real-time user feedback, all in one SDK. With Instabug, you can continually monitor and measure the performance of your app as perceived by your users, empower your users to report issues and ask questions seamlessly right within your app, get all of the information you need about bugs, crashes, and other issues, and get them fixed in record time, all with a focus on privacy and security. You don't need to worry about the hassle of switching to a new tool either. It only takes a minute to integrate Instabug into your app, and it fits right within your existing workflow, with support for things like Jira, Slack, Trello, GitHub, Zendesk, and over 10 other popular tools. Join over 25,000 top mobile developers around the world who use Instabug to ship the highest quality apps. Go to try.instabug.com/appstories to learn more today. Again, that URL is try.instabug.com/appstories. Our thanks to Instabug for their support of the show. All right, Federico, the next thing we want to talk about a little bit, I guess, is SharePlay, because, you and I we've talked about SharePlay in the past, and you and I experimented with it. I don't know about you, but the last time I used SharePlay was when you and I were testing it.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We spent a morning one day working on it just to see how it worked for our reviews last fall. And then I haven't really used it, but that's not to say that it's not useful to other people as well, because I know there are a lot of readers and listeners who have found ways to use it. I think probably the most valuable one that I can think of that I haven't had a need to use myself yet is tech support. But, you can watch a movie with somebody, enjoy some music together, and there's a growing number of third-party apps that incorporate this too. What Apple has done with this update has made it easier to get into SharePlay. Before you had to start that FaceTime call first, but now you can actually access SharePlay from inside apps themselves. So it's there are two ways now. You can do it from both ends, whether you're starting in the app or starting in FaceTime itself, which I think is a smart move. It just makes it surfaces it in more locations, especially when maybe you want to share something. You're not thinking, oh, I'm going to make a FaceTime call. You're thinking, I'm going to use this app.
Yeah.
And then you realize, all right. Yeah, I can share this now with someone. And so I think to me, that's actually a more natural place to put it. And I think it's a good step in the right direction.
I agree. They're removing friction from the experience. They are effectively cutting a step from the process, and they're thinking about this the right way. They're thinking about it in the context of, I'm doing something, I want to share this with someone, as opposed to, I'm starting a FaceTime call, then I'm going to find the app I want to share, which was a clunky, like I understand why they did it that way, but this one is more of an integrated flow, right? That you're going from, oh, I see this cool thing, I want to share it, and it's a guided process within the app. So I think that's really well done. We I don't want to pile on SharePlay. I do think it's generally useful for a ton of people, especially for the tech support angle of SharePlay. Like, I did screen sharing with my mom one time, and it really was useful. That part of SharePlay, to be able to assist someone over a FaceTime call and to see their screen and tell them exactly what to do. I understand why we have some club members and some App Stories listeners who say that SharePlay is really helpful for them because they don't live near their friends and family. And so being able to share something like a TV show or movie or listening to a song together brings them a sense of proximity, to their loved ones. And so I totally understand that. I also, I don't know, I feel like I would have used this a lot in 2020 for the first lockdown, when I didn't know what to do with my time at home, honestly. And I'm pretty fortunate because I'm a very busy person with a lot of hobbies. So it's not like I'm never really out of ideas. But for a ton of people, SharePlay would have been incredible in 2020 and in the first half of 2021. Now, it's these fancier implementations like, I've seen like these collaborative apps based on SharePlay, and they are, they remind me a bit of iMessage apps. They're cool. I'm sure there's people who use them, but
Yeah, it's just something I think you and I haven't really had much of an occasion or a reason to use. And in that sense, I think it's a little bit, for some people, at least for us, it's a solution looking for a problem to solve. But as you say, I mean, people do have friends and family living in far off locations, and it is a way to stay connected with people.
Yeah.
We should also mention, too, that SharePlay is available in the share sheet now as well, which makes a lot of sense to me. I'm surprised that wasn't there at the beginning, because the share sheet, I think a lot of people are accustomed to going there to initiate, sharing. And that's essentially that's exactly what SharePlay is. It's sharing.
Yeah. I also want to mention a new feature in 15.4, which is being able to add the EU, and I believe the UK ones are supported as well. Mike told me today, the COVID vaccine digital certificate that you may have as a EU or UK citizen. It's a QR code, right, that the government gives you. You can now scan that QR code, so you can just scan it from the camera, or if you have saved it as an image in Photos, you should be able to long press it in Photos because it gets recognized as a data detector. And you can add your COVID vaccine digital certificate in two places. In Apple Health, where it becomes an official immunization record in the in that section of the Health app with all the details, how many shots you've taken, which brand of the vaccine did you get. But you can also add it as a vaccination card in Wallet, where it becomes this pink card with a QR code. It says EU DCC at the bottom, which should be European Union Digital COVID Certificate, I believe. And I tested this. In Italy, it's called the Green Pass. That's what we call our vaccine, our proof of vaccination. So like shops and restaurants, they ask you for a green pass and you show a QR code. And the last time I tried this, instead of showing the official, the one from the app of the Italian government, I tested the wallet version, and it worked right away. It was recognized just fine by the QR readers that most restaurants and shops have. and it worked right away. So, and the guy was like, well, how do you have that in Wallet? And I had to explain why.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. I'm glad that works as well as it does. I mean, in the United States, unfortunately, still there are very few states that support this, and it's not where I live. And as a matter of fact, at least in Illinois, where I am, most places don't even ask you for any kind of proof of vaccine anyway. Yeah. So it's a little bit beside the point here, but I'm glad it exists. All right, Federico, let's wrap up by talking about macOS. And really, the list is pretty short because we already talked about universal control, which was the big marquee feature for 12.3. We talked about shortcuts and the fact that tagging is now part of the actions there. But there are some other things. And one is, and I think this actually is an iOS too, but we hadn't mentioned it yet, is that there's a fifth Siri voice. So there's a brand new Siri voice that you can check out and add if you want to use that one. Probably the one that I think I'll use maybe the most is spatialized stereo is now in Control Center, which is new. I mean, I listen to a lot of music on my Mac, and now you can go up to the Control Center and deal with spatialized stereo and whether it is using head tracking and that sort of thing. It's just like on iOS. So anybody who's used those features there in Control Center on an iPhone or an iPad will be used to it. Another thing that you probably will never notice, but is going to happen if you connect your Mac to AirPods, is that the firmware of those AirPods can now be updated automatically when connected to a Mac. Before, you had to be attached to an iPhone or an iPad for that to happen. And, it's one of those things that happens in the background. You connect to one of those devices, and silently in the background, the software gets updated at some point. That's totally controlled by the system. There's no way to kind of force it yourself. Another update is that the Sony DualSense controllers that were already supported on the Mac, they now support the adaptive triggers, which
nice.
Yeah, I'm really happy with the controller support on the Mac. It's a shame that it's not more of a gaming platform, but those arcade games, there's some good games in there, and now they can support the adaptive triggers, which I think is nice. Translate, which is used in Safari to translate web pages in foreign languages, now support Italian and Chinese, traditional Chinese. I know that you tried Italian, and I did too. And it looked, at least to my eyes, I looked at a couple of Italian newspapers. It looked like it did a pretty decent job at translating it.
Yeah, it did for me. I didn't know you also tried.
I did. I didn't
know. Which ones? I'm curious. Do you remember?
I don't even remember.
Okay,
I just Googled Italian language newspapers and came up with a list and clicked on one of the first ones.
Interesting approach. You could have just asked me.
I know. Well, it was one of those things. There's a notes field in passwords in Safari now. So if you want to have some notes related to a password that you saved, that's possible now too. That product, the password feature is just getting better and better with every release of the OS. And I'm really happy to have notes in there. It's not something that I use frequently, but it can come in handy. And then I guess the last three things I would mention are, we've already talked about in the past, the fact that kernel extensions for things like Dropbox and OneDrive, those are gone now. So those apps are being updated. There was a little bit of a awkward transition with Dropbox, which I use, where it worked a little differently, but overall the transition I think has been totally fine. There's a new framework called Screen Capture Kit, which I don't think does a lot yet, but has a lot of potential because, as I understand it, it enables a bunch of advanced features for video streaming. So this is the kind of thing that you're going to see implemented in things like OBS and other streaming software for producing video for Twitch and other streaming things. And then finally, Python 2.7. It's gone. It's no longer in macOS.
Wow.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a big deal for anyone who's used Python in the past.
I do not know Python 3 at all. So, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, no, and Apple recommends you install Python 3, but that you have to do yourself. I mean, it was 2.7 was baked in, and it's not in there anymore. And I know that a lot of people used AppleScript and other things to automate things on their Mac. We're upset about that, but it's something that I think Apple telegraphed a while back. It's not.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, it wasn't. It's not like it was a big surprise or anything, but it's still, I think, probably caught people a little off guard if they hadn't been paying attention to those warnings. And that's about it for macOS. I mean, most of those things I don't use a lot, but I have been super happy with Universal Control. I'm literally using it every single day at this point. I mean, it's become central to the way I use my Mac, and it's really made the way I use the iPad and the Mac, it's really changed my relationship with the way I use the two devices. There's a lot less friction in switching back and forth. And when I'm done sitting at my desk for the day, I can just grab that iPad, throw it in a keyboard case and, the Magic Keyboard case, and take it with me and watch a movie or read a book or do something else on the couch because I don't feel like sitting at a desk anymore. It's been fantastic. All right, Federico, that's it for this week. Another App Stories in the can. I want to thank our 4 sponsors for this episode. That was SourceGraph, Revenue Cat, Pillow, and Instabug. You can find the 2 of us over at macstories.net, where we're writing away. And Federico's on Twitter and Instagram, where he's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVORHWES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.